Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's Midweek Maranatha. I'm glad to have you joining us today. We have got a wonderful program in store for you. Hey, I'm so glad to have everyone that's joining us, by the way, that we've got on Rumble. Of course, if you don't have our Rumble channel, encourage you to get that. It's a great backup or not backup if you want to go there as your go-to. Of course, those that are on YouTube as well. I see Annabelle. Hello, back to you, and Nancy Harpazo Clothing Company, Joseph, Caroline, Dora, Caterlin. Now, of course, Pookie and Ski and all you all. There's so many of you on there right now, and we're so glad to have you all joining us. And so, praise God. Really looking forward to it today. By the way, encourage everyone. Give us a thumbs up on there. Like us, subscribe. If you're not subscribed, get our app, by the way. Our app is free. Encourage you to get that as well. Share us out there on your social media, and we encourage you to get involved in the chat and or the comment section afterwards. And by the way, thank you guys so much for all of your support, your prayer support, encouragement support, and financial support as well. All of those really do and are making a difference in us continuing to move forward in what the Lord is calling us to do here. So, all right, so today's title is It's Heating Up, and the war threat is growing, and I mean big time. And I got someone here that's going to be joining us that's just the perfect guy to be talking about these things today. We've got Pete Garcia joining us. Hello, Pete.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you doing?
I'm great, man. Busy. We have no water at the house right now, so
Oh
I went and
no!
worked out this morning. Can't shower, can't do anything until the water comes back on. So
Oh no! Hot water heater or?
no, it's down for the whole area. Something to do with the pumps or whatever.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay, wow. And
yeah.
it's just going to be for the day though, right? Let's hope.
Yeah, it should just be the day.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, we were having our hot water heater went out, and it was out for 10 days, I think it was, a week and a half. So that was a lot of fun. But had to kind of do things a little differently. But
Yeah.
all right. Well, hey, we're going to get right on to it because we have so much to go over. This whole war threat is really continuing to escalate. We all know the word says in Matthew 24 about wars and rumors of wars and all of those things. When we see in the word, we see a major escalation of that, obviously, during the time of the tribulation. And I believe that the things that we see right now are the setup for so many of the things that will ultimately end up taking place. And I mean, good grief, there's major stuff going on. We've got there with Israel and Iran and the Gaza Strip. We've got there with the Hezbollah and Lebanon. We've got the Houthis there in the Red Sea. That's quite the issue that's been continuing to develop, and doesn't matter how much activity goes on over there from our part, Britain's part. It's not deterring them one bit. We've got the situation there in the South China Sea. We've got North Korea. We've got Russia, Ukraine, NATO. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. What's on your radar right now?
Well, we have. I want to. Let me. Can I? If I can share my screen, I will start off with just one slide.
Yep, go for it.
'Cause I want to put everything into context of where we are this year and why the folks in Davos believe that misinformation is the single biggest threat. Let me see if I can do this here. All right, share. These are all the nations that are having elections this year. If you can see that.
Yep, we got it.
Yeah. So this is from Time Magazine. So this is all the places in the world that are going to be changing out leadership And this does not include nations that have civil wars, coup d'etats, any kind of juntas, overthrows, or whatever. This is just a place where uh, leadership could be changing out. Now, granted, when you look at places like Russia, North Korea, um, probably some Muslim nations, you can pretty much guarantee that those elections are a sham. They're just going to be there for a show.
Right.
But not nevertheless, the one place in here that I would say is pretty much the most contested is Ukraine, because Ukraine, I guess they were already supposed to have elections, but they've been pushed off due to the war. So Zelensky will remain in power, but um, I guess there's a couple ways that this can go, and I'll stop sharing here at this. Okay. Um, is if the United States and the EU did not fund this conflict in Ukraine, it would have ended about 2 years ago. But because we've been pumping money into this, and I think that right now the United States has put anywhere north of $100 billion into this conflict to keep the war going, even though it's a completely one-sided war. Russia completely outmans, has way more military capabilities than Ukraine does, and not only that, Russia has the ability to manufacture their own armaments and their own weapons and their own things, and plus they've also got uh, huge depots with and huge supplies of armaments and drones and things from places like China and Iran. So they are not running short by any stretch of the imagination. And I would argue that that Russia has put very little effort into this conflict thus far. And I'm not a Russia cheerleader or anything like that. I'm just simply stating the fact that if Russia had wanted to conquer Ukraine, they could have a long time
Absolutely.
ago. It seems like the geopolitical strategy that they had, goals that they had attempted to do, which was to secure the Donbass region as well as keeping Crimea, is still intact. And if there's any type of peace settlement going forward, those two things are completely off the table. Russia will never turn those things back over to Ukraine or to anybody else for that matter. Um, but what I'm thinking might happen this year, and this is all dependent upon whether or not uh, the Western leaders get that desperate. But we know recently that Macron had been making public statements about sending troops, French troops, into Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he does not have a lot of support from other EU leaders on this matter. They're all saying kind of the opposite, that they don't they don't want to send anybody in there. But for some reason, Macron is, pardon the language, hell bent on putting troops, boots on the ground in Ukraine, which obviously would pit NATO against Russia, on that first day. So if the intent is to create a larger war, then I think that we'll see NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine at some point this year. If the intent is to escalate this, which at that point, I think that's when Russia, and I think that's really what Russia's been waiting on, and why they are not steamrolling Ukraine like they could have. When you just look at the military budgets, the amount of equipment, soldiers, budget, etc., Russia, it'd be like us wanting to invade Mexico, but we only take over the border areas. We could if we wanted to, but we really don't want to take over all of Mexico. The point is that they could have a long time ago. They just, for whatever the reasons, they've chosen to limit their advance to the Donbass region, but and Crimea, but as well they've been very effective in crippling the Zelensky government and the Zelensky economy, because most of the population from Ukraine is gone, and they've had a huge number of those. Somewhere in the neighborhood of half a billion Ukrainian soldiers have already died in this conflict. So the only way this war keeps going is if the West keeps pumping money into this. And there seems to be a decreasing appetite for that at present. So all of that to say, that if the intent is to destabilize the West due to these elections and to create a crisis that's big enough so that they can either delay or simply call off all of those elections that we saw for Western Europe and for the United States, um, then we could see them try and initiate some type of World War III scenario, which means that they put NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. Now, with that said, and I mentioned this earlier to you, Russia has already made deals with China. We saw those meetings taking place in February in 2021 before they even launched an invasion. So there was some type of back deal arrangement with China that China could easily send 1 million soldiers to the front there in Ukraine and not even drop a sweat there, because for them, they can man these massive armies. China's problem isn't that they can't fill the ranks. China's problem is getting these soldiers, moving them around the world. They're pretty limited right now to how far they can, in terms of logistics, move folks around, soldiers to secure places well beyond their border. They're pretty much boxed in on the Pacific side with South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and all these places that host U.S. naval assets and Western assets that would counter that, as well as India. And then that's why they've focused turning inward and creating this Iron Silk Road, which would take this massive railway system from China. And I don't remember where the town it starts in, but it would move from China all the way to the Middle East, and it would branch between somewhere in Iraq. It would go south into where Africa, and then north into Europe and into Russia. And they're really focused on creating this new Iron Silk Road. So all that to say, I think if NATO got boots on the ground in Ukraine, that would trigger a series of things that would happen, to include Chinese soldiers siding with the Russians in Ukraine, greatly escalating the threat there. And then at the same time, I believe China would also take advantage of that situation and then launch an invasion on Taiwan.
Absolutely.
And this would have a dual edge or double-edged effect to it. Not only would it increase the requirement for NATO soldiers in Ukraine to be able to match what Russia and China have there, but it also splits the American military into two different operational fronts. You have a European front and then a Pacific front. So now the U.S. cannot just solely focus on Ukraine. Now they have to also split their forces on the Pacific side, because we've made all sorts of commitments to Taiwan to protect them or come to their aid in this event of a Chinese invasion. So in China right now is sitting for their plan, which is their People's Liberation Army Navy, or People's Liberation Army's Navy plan, at 355 vessels, combat vessels, and they've greatly ramped it up from where they used to be. And this is ships of all sizes, battleships, everything. So I think Taiwan would be like trying to jump on a thorny porcupine in terms of the amount of defenses they have, but I think eventually they would be overwhelmed by the Chinese onslaught to retake that island. And that is Xi Jinping's number one goal before he dies, is to reunite those two. And Xi Jinping is not a young man. He is getting up there in age. So I think this is going to happen sooner rather than later. The economic ramifications for taking Taiwan are huge, considering their dominance in the microchip processing and that type of technology. I think Taiwan is number one in the world right now with that. So if Chinese can get a handle on that, they will dominate economically. So that's kind of where I see things going. And this would be a worst case scenario going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of seriously a lot to unpack with all of that. One of the things that we're seeing, okay, is we are seeing empire building. So look, Vladimir Putin is wanting to go back to the old days of their empire, so to speak. Okay, he's wanting to take on more territory, the whole Russian Federation, to go back to what were their glory days in the Soviet era. We've got, as you're saying, the same exact thing going on with the Chinese dictator there. The same exact thing in regards to Taiwan. I don't believe he's going to stop there either, by the way. Then we've got, this has been the desire of Erdogan in Turkey for quite a few years now, well over 5 years, probably closer to 10 years or so. This has been his desire, again, to try and expand and go back to the old days of the Ottoman Empire, you know. So they're all looking at those glory days with all of that. And I heard that China is now attempting somewhat of a naval blockade around a certain part there of Taiwan as well. So that's continuing to heat up. And look, China wants, going back to Russia here for a moment, China wants Russia to keep on prolonging this situation involving the United States and NATO. Because the more that we're active, you can only be spread so thin, guys, right? And the more that we're active over in that theater, then it takes away from, I mean, we can only do so much at once, and it allows China to continue to build and to flex their military muscle and to prepare for what I believe will be an ultimate takeover and invasion of Taiwan. So China wants Russia to distract the United States. And then you've got Secretary General of NATO saying that Ukraine will be joining North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Or wait, am I talking about that? Yeah, NATO, right? Yeah, NATO. Yeah, wants them, he said it's going to happen. It's not an if, it's just a matter of when. And that's a major red line there for Russia as well, because then any attack on Ukraine then would be considered to be an attack on all the other NATO nations. And the NATO charter then becomes activated, and you've got a major global war involved there, a world war, whether it be nukes or not nukes. That's another thing. It doesn't have to be with nukes for it to be a world war. But their overall strategy, I mean, this is really moving forward very quickly. There's another aspect of that, though, too. Not only the Asian theater, the European theater, but let's not forget the Middle Eastern theater, where we're spread out over there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously with Israel, anytime Israel does anything, it quickly garners world attention. So the attack on my son's back there peeking around the corner. He's homesick today, so I'm here with him.
Bud.
But yeah, it was a long night. The fact that October 7th happened the way it did, and I think if it had been anything less than what, in terms of brutality or the barbarity of these attacks, Israel might have acquiesced to global pressure to sue for peace or have some type of peace settlement agreement, arrangement, whatever, put forth. But it was so horrific, and the fact that they still the Hamas is still holding all these hostages. Israel would be insane to stop fighting right now. They basically got Hamas on the ropes. They're down to one city left in the far south, Rafah. So I think they're going to continue to finish things out here through Ramadan. And the fact that the Muslims seemingly didn't care that it was a Jewish holy day, I think the Jews are quickly returning that favor, that they're going to press this into Ramadan unless these hostages are released. And Hamas, they're not. They've already rejected the plan that was put forth here just recently. So it looks like it will proceed into Ramadan, and it will seemingly end or spell the end for Hamas as a organization. And Netanyahu's already put forth his post Gaza operations plan for who is going to govern Gaza and what that's going to look like. And so I think that's probably going to be the reality going forward um, here, probably within the next month or so. And I do think things will wrap up here sometime around between now and Passover, or before the end of April. Which on top of that, you have the red heifer situation, which they will, whether they do it in public or they do it in private. I think one of these heifers is going to be sacrificed, and I think that will start to trigger all other sorts of things to happen, and it may escalate in the north because of that
I would
with Hezbollah.
I would
So
agree. Yeah, I would totally agree. And by the way, let me bring this up here on our screen right here. Being that you mentioned Israel, Ukraine gets defense boost from Israel. So, I mean, think about this for a moment. All right. So, if you are friends with my enemy, you are now my enemy, right? So,
mm-hmm.
and this makes me think of Ezekiel 38. This is not something direct with Ezekiel 38, but indirect, because we know that Russia is going to come down from the north. We know that others are going to come along with her as well. Iran, one of those involved. Turkey is another one involved, et cetera, et cetera. So, and this is just one more thing that is or will put a bitter taste in Russia's mouth, right? Wait a minute. You are going to be giving a defense boost, Israel giving a defense boost to Ukraine. Wait a minute. Now we've got a direct issue with Israel. What are your thoughts about that?
It just seems like it's inevitable, if I can say that way, that this year is I think you said it earlier, it's a tipping point
Yeah.
for world events, just like 2020 was. That there was the way the world was before 2020, and then there's the way the world is today as a result of the events of 2020. I think this year will be also one of those kind of watershed years where there's going to be the way things were before 2024, and there's going to be the way things are going after 2024. And it seems inevitable in the sense that no side is willing to yield in pressing for their agendas, and it's just all going to come crashing down. So you have the old saying, an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. What happened? Who wins? So I think
Right.
for us, I mean, we're all going to be, if the Lord tarries and if the Lord allows it, we're just going to be collateral damage in all of this. And I think that everybody's pushing for their worldview, and then their new world order from both sides are really racing forward to try and cement control over that.
Right. Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Um, So I don't know if you've seen this one or not. Let's bring this one up here. Iran gives Hezbollah the green light to escalate attacks along Israel's northern border and launch large-scale assault amid warnings of an October 7 Part 2. This is really
Yeah.
interesting. It's no surprise to me, but I'm fascinated by the fact that they're actually coming out and saying the quiet part out loud now officially, that they're giving them the green light to escalate those attacks. And we've been anticipating, and things have been heating up on the northern border. They're going to continue to do so as well. But we also know that Iran is going to make it out of this whole thing because she has to, in order to be of any consequence for Ezekiel 38. Your thoughts?
I think you're spot on. I think both Russia and Iran, come out of these two conflicts relatively unscathed. because they are being prepared for that day and that hour for the Gog-Magog conflict, as it states in Ezekiel 38:39, as well as the other nations that join in the fray, which could include some parts of China or Chinese troops or Chinese assets. Um, now, with regards to Hezbollah and Iran, I guess the big plan for them, um, for the longest time, really, has been to use Hezbollah as a deterrent from Israel striking Iran's nuclear capabilities. The three main reactor sites that are in Iran, that are incredibly deeply buried in mountains and under the ground there. If Israel were to ever strike them, then Iran could unleash Hezbollah upon Israel. And there's always been that threat, because think about where Hamas was with all the tunnels that they've built, and I can't remember the exact mileage. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of um, 200 kilometers, 200 miles of tunnels underneath Gaza, just spider webbing all over the place. And that's only been since 2000, and I think they took over in 2008. Now think about Hezbollah. Hezbollah's been up there since the 90s. So how much more time have they had to build tunnels and really dig in to Lebanon? And who knows how much infrastructure they have under the ground right now. But if they gave them the green light to go ahead and attack, then I think that this is going to turn into a Psalm 83 scenario, because I think Iran's getting desperate right now because Hamas is so utterly falling apart and being destroyed and dismantled. At the same time, Israel's been able to push Hezbollah back in the north. There's a river up there that kind of cuts Lebanon in half, and I guess it's north of that river. So there seems to be some sort of desperation in this move to unleash their number one weapon against Israel. But we'll see. We'll see. I think I think this is a Psalm 83 scenario, but I am not convinced. I have not convinced myself yet that Psalm 83 is a one-off event. It could be a multi-pronged, multi-year event where it started in 1948. And it's just been, these series of attacks on Israel ever since. And it will culminate, though, I think, with the destruction of Hezbollah, the destruction of Damascus, an Isaiah 17 scenario, mm-hmm. and basically the eradication of all of these threats that are right on the immediate border of Israel, whether it's from the Arabs and Egyptians and Jordanians and all those folks that are in Gaza claiming to be Palestinians, or it could be parts of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, what they call the West Bank, that part also being ignited into some larger scale conflict. So, but I think Israel at one point, I don't know where they still are now, they were operating on 7 different fronts. So it is a very what's the word, kinetic, the most kinetic period of time that we've seen in Israel, that I've seen in my lifetime. So
I agree. And then when you look at just what's going on a global scale, we're seeing Russia is continuing to arm herself, Iran, big time, North Korea, big time, China, big time. Wow, things are changing very, very rapidly. And oh, wait a minute, I thought it was land for peace. I thought that Gaza, well, not that I really thought this, we knew better, but that Gaza, look, if Israel gave them the Gaza Strip, that it was going to lead to peace. Did it lead to peace, everyone? No, it never does. Capitulation never leads to peace. It doesn't. You have to be strong. You have to be strong, because when you're not, your enemies will take note of that, and they're going to walk all over you. They will definitely walk all over you. So what about this? NATO, we already alluded to this earlier, NATO troops in Ukraine. French proposal brings a warning from Russia. And so, I don't know what Macron is trying to do here, if it's just a little bit of saber rattling, trying to look like the little big guy out there, or what it is. I don't know. It could be just setting out some bait out there, perhaps, to see how the Russians respond to that. I don't know. But what are your thoughts, though, in regards to the French proposal? So Macron is saying that that they are not going to allow Ukraine to fail and to become part of the Russian Federation. They're not going to allow it by all means. So what do you say about that, and what are the farther implications of that for the United States and NATO as a whole?
You know, again, I think because this is an election year for so many nations, and there's so much political turmoil inside of Europe itself with the protests going on in the Netherlands, the seemingly populist leaders that have risen up in Italy, in Hungary, and there's some other countries I'm sure there, the Brexit, all the things that are, it's looking like the EU is beginning to unravel a little bit. So it takes a big crisis to unite people, because this is what the left continually does. They use crisis, whether they create it or they just take advantage of a situation, and then they exploit it to their advantage. So I do think that before the year's up, I think that we'll see NATO troops in Ukraine, and I think that that will lead to it will lead to disastrous effects. Now, for all Trump's faults, he did get the EU to at least look in the mirror and show that they are not upholding their end of the commitment to NATO that they had promised to do in terms of funding and manpower. So I think the commitment was for 2% of that to go into NATO, and most of those countries had never even reached the level of 2% in their funding and
Right.
commitments to creating a stronger NATO. Now take that, that chiding from Trump back in 2019, 2020, and then you look at the effects of what followed immediately after in 2021 when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan without notifying his NATO partners ahead of time. And that level of distrust, I mean, I think that was the icing on the cake to prove to the Europeans that, hey, we cannot rely on the United States anymore to do anything for us. We need to start looking at ourselves. So that was a wake-up call for the EU. And on top of that, Russia invades that next February. So now it's come back to the forefront where they are now seriously having to consider creating a European specific defense force. And that those plans have been on the table for a long time.
They sure have.
Going back to the days of Sarkozy, and these ideas of creating a European defense force and European Navy and European Air Force had been something that they had talked about for years and years, but they've always had the United States there to back them up, and so there wasn't any real rush or urgency to do this. But again, with Trump's badgering about this and kind of publicly humiliating them on this, as well as Biden's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, and then Russia on top of that, moving into Ukraine, I think those three things were the right catalyst for them to do this. So I think Macron may be looking at this as a means to further exacerbate that type of thinking. And if he can, even if it's just saber rattling, if he can escalate that saber rattling to the point where Russia is actually going to do something, or they do something more, and I've said for a long time, all it takes is one stray missile to
That's right.
accidentally fly off course and hit Poland, or Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia or some other type of NATO country, then it's game on. Somebody can trigger
Right.
Article 5, and the next thing you know, NATO's formally or officially declaring war against Russia, which then will drag in the Chinese, and then that will be a world war, because China is not going to just commit to Ukraine. They're going to take advantage of that situation as well and move on Taiwan, which again, I mean, there's so many different things. I mean, and they have a lot of, for all their faults, Russia and China have a lot of these bulldogs, or pit bulls on leashes right now that they can just shake the leash on them and get them all stirred up. But they can also let them go and say, hey, do what you want to do. So you have places like North Korea, you have Iran, you have forces in Libya, you have forces in Sudan. These are places that the Russians and the Chinese have been building up and arming the Houthis. The Houthis have threatened to cut the internet cable that connects to Asia and Europe. I don't know. I want to say they just did it,
They did.
or attacked it, but it's right off of their coast. And that's not the only place. I mean, there's all these underwater cables that connect internet around the world are incredibly precarious, and they're precariously placed there and are easy pickings if the East wants to cripple the West. And so we saw with just the other day the outage that we had, the cell phone outage. My phone was out. My wife's phone was out, but my two daughters' phones worked. And so it's weird. It was a weird situation where you have three of the biggest cell phone carriers, plus a number of websites that go down, and to include Starlink. And it just shows you how fragile this modern day construct is for the modern world, and how reliant we are upon so many different systems. It wouldn't take much to upend all that. And so I think the cell phone outage, the official explanation I heard was it was a solar flare, like an X-class solar flare.
Of course it was.
And I know that we're in a solar maximum, so for me that makes sense that there's going to be the increased solar activity during this period of time. But I've heard other things too. I don't know how much truth there is in those things, or whether it was some kind of cyber attack, or this was some kind of new code that was being put into these AT&T systems. I don't know. But all I'm saying is that our current way of life is incredibly fragile.
Sure is.
I mean, if you just imagine if the trash services stopped wherever you live. If trash services stopped, they went on strike or some other thing happened, and how quickly trash would build up, and how crippling that would become. It is. You can see how fragile and easily it would be to upend our society.
Well, and it's interesting that, pretty much right at around the same time there of the whole cell phone thing that was taking place, we got the whole thing going on with the prescriptions, and affecting Optum, United Healthcare, and all that stuff. And I mean, there's a number of these things that are happening really pretty much simultaneously now, and against hospitals, against various infrastructure, corporate infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all part of the aspects of this warfare. I believe that they're testing right now how far they can take these things. They're putting out those feeders right now for when it really is game time. None of that is really, I don't think, is really game time. They're putting out the feeders for when they really launch, in my personal opinion, a major cyber attack that will, if it's going to be really effective, if it takes place from a number of sources simultaneously, from a number of sources striking a number of sources across U.S. or global infrastructure. So, and when we look at what's going on, again, the French proposal to bring in troops there and everything, look, there is a distrust, there has been for quite some time, and it is growing, of the United States, and I would say rightfully so. Afghanistan is just one, maybe that's the nail on the head a little bit more recently, but there's a number of reasons for that, and the French have had issues with the United States for a while anyhow. So the United States has got to take a back seat. Look, we know this. We look in the Word, and the United States is going to have to take a back seat for that final empire ultimately to rise. And you had mentioned something, Pete, about a European army. There's this article in Italy calls for European army. I've actually got this up on my desk right here. Italy calls for European army. Without a shared military, EU countries are defenseless sparrows in a world of eagles. And again, why is that? So you've got Italy calling for that. You've got France saying what they're saying because they do not trust the United States to have the resolve any longer to have Europe's back.
Yeah. Yeah, I've long written and thought that, I mean, I'm talking going back to 2011, I've been writing about this particular issue. Two things. One is that NATO would eventually come to an end, and it wouldn't go away and disappear overnight, but it would be transitioned into a European defense force. So the structure, the training locations, the operational bases, anything tied with NATO that's in Europe is going to be converted over to some type of European defense force. That to me was obvious from,
Right.
you know, what, 15 years ago or so.
Right.
And I still believe that's going to happen. The second thing is that at the end of all this, at the end of this Russia-Ukraine conflict, at the end of the collapsing of the United States, at the end of Gog Magog, at the end of the Psalm 83, you know, the rapture, Gog Magog, the collapse of the United States. At the end of all those things, I think what we're going to see is a revival of the Union for the Mediterranean, which was if you look it up on Google, it looks almost identical to the old Roman Empire. So it's all the nations that border the Mediterranean, and they still exist as a organization. And interestingly enough, Israel is also party to this. But if you were to take that plus take NATO and strip out, like, say, Turkey, you would have the old Roman Empire, you know, and so I don't know what state Turkey is going to be in after Gog and Magog, after that war is concluded. But I'm sure whatever is left over then would be organized into this new system. So I think the Union for the Mediterranean is the model. I think NATO is going away. I think NATO gets shifted into this European Defense Force. And I think when you look at that alone, that will be the final headquarters, you know, the final structure in terms of where the beast, the Antichrist, rises out of. I think that's what it's going to look like. And so I don't know, I can't tell you right now how those things fit together necessarily or when they happen. I just think that it's already there. It's already in place. It's just been put on the back burner, and it's been forgotten about. And I think just like the Patriot Act, when the right crisis comes along, that thing's going to be taken off the shelf. It's going to be dusted off. And this is going to be the new plan that's going to be presented. And that's what the way it's going to be going forward. So here's something, and I know I've said a lot of crazy things today, right? I know the things I've, you know, said, hey, this could happen this year. This is what it looks like to me. Let me just remind folks of World War I and how that started. So you have the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was a low-level aristocrat in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. If he hadn't been assassinated, nobody would have ever heard of this guy.
Right.
But listen to this quote here. This is from Anatoly Kaletsky, and he wrote this back in 2014 at the 100-year anniversary of World War I, the start of World War I. He wrote, in early 1914, though it seemed impossible that Britain and France would go to war with Germany to defend Russia against Austria-Hungary over a dispute with Serbia, yet by June 28th, war moved straight from impossible to inevitable without ever passing through improbable. 4 years later, 10 million people had died. Think about that. Think about how impossible that seemed prior to it actually happening.
Right.
You had Britain and France goes to war against Germany to defend Russia against Austria-Hungary over a dispute with Serbia. I mean, you couldn't even write that into a fiction and sell it because it just seems so crazy.
Right.
But it happened. So crazier things have happened than what I'm saying could happen with NATO putting a boot on the ground in Ukraine, Russia getting involved, dragging China in. Like, that to me doesn't seem crazy at all. That seems almost inevitable that could happen. And so, I don't know. I think I think as crazy as things were in 2020, things are only going to get crazier every single year, and they have been. So 2024 is no different, and the only difference is it's this watershed year with all of these elections threatening to upend the current leadership right now. They're racing and really driving the world into some type of global government that nobody wants. So it just seems the natural conclusion to this that they will present some major crisis. And this we already have a war. All they got to do is
Right.
just do a couple little things here, and it's going to drag everybody into it. And then you can set those elections aside. You can claim they're delayed until the end of the conflict, and who knows when that's going to be. So I don't know. In You think about 9/11, right? Think about how crazy that was, that it happened the way it happened, that guys with box cutters could take over planes and fly them into buildings. Now, think about the fact, what did the administration do? The Bush administration, they took an old document from 1995, which Biden and I can't remember the other senator's name. They're both senators. They came up with this. Two Democrat senators came up with this Homeland Anti-Terrorism Omnibus bill that was so draconian that it could not pass Congress in multiple votes, even after the Oklahoma City bombing. So they put it on a shelf. And right after 9/11, they pulled that thing right out. They dusted it off, changed a couple of the dates, and Secretary Ashcroft presented this to Congress, and it was passed into legislation, into law within 30 days after 9/11. So crazy things can happen very
Absolutely.
quickly. And I think that we're in one of those years where it's going to happen just as crazy like that.
I agree. I agree. They're always watching, always waiting. And if they need to put something on a shelf, which they do on a regular basis, hey, they'll do that. They'll wait it out. They'll regroup. They'll come back at a more opportune time. And that's exactly what we see happening. And I believe that the deep state within NATO, they want war big time. They have been pushing the envelope for a long time, literally pushing Russia's buttons. I'm not a Russia uh, supporter, guys.
Dickofan.
Yeah, or propagandist or whatever. I'm not on any of their sides. That's the whole thing. You've got Russia, you've got Ukraine, you've got NATO and the U.S. involved in all of that. I don't agree with any of them. I think they're all nuts. There is evil on all of those, on all three corners or four corners of that. So it's not who's good and who's bad. I believe that they're all bad. And and then you've got, again, Turkey is a part of NATO. But I'm just waiting to see how long that's going to be like that for, because Turkey's pulling away from NATO, and they're becoming more and more radicalized as time goes by, and we know they're going to be in Ezekiel 38, and I don't know. I personally just wonder, will Turkey even be in NATO at the point of Ezekiel 38? It just doesn't seem to fit right to me, but I don't know. Hey, there's a question on our app here from Eric T, saying, militarily speaking, what do you believe is the next move for the U.S. and Israel?
Well, I think we're seeing it right now. We're seeing the United States right when October 7th happened. The surprising thing was that the Biden administration had really stood behind Israel, and it really surprised a lot of people. And what I wrote in the article Equivocation, I wrote it on the 16th of October. I said, don't let these guys fool you. They're standing by Israel right now, but they are going to be they're only doing this so that they can get their foot in the door, and they can increasingly pressure Israel to come to some kind of peace settlement. And that's exactly what they're doing now. And I think the more that we press into this and press them to do this, the more disastrous it's going to become for the United States. And I think at the same time, the more that we pressure Israel to do something that they don't want to do and they shouldn't do, I think that we're going to start to see the other threats beginning to emerge in so many different facets that we are going to quickly have to abandon even messing with Israel and trying to pressure them and deal with these other problems that are popping up all over the United States. So you have an open border that has led countless millions across. And out of those millions, thousands of those have been identified as criminals and terrorists and other things, and not even from Mexico and Central America. I mean, they're coming from the Middle East, coming from China, all sorts of places, North Africa, and they are, I would think that they're the perfect idea for a sleeper cell. I mean, how many hundreds of sleeper cells are currently sitting in the United States waiting to be activated, just like Hezbollah was waiting to be activated by their puppet master, Iran. We've got countless folks here that are being waiting to be activated to, at the right time, strike. And it doesn't have to be a 9/11 style of attack. It could just be smaller scale attacks, but they're happening all over the place from so many different groups. And it's very much like that Netflix documentary that the Obamas were involved in. There was all these attacks that happened, but nobody knew who they were coming from. And I think that is a form of they call it the revelation of the method, where they reveal something ahead of time to gauge where the public is on that and whether they're going to freak out, whether they just like, whatever. And I think what they got was the whatever kind of apathetic attitude from most Americans that just, and I think something like that could happen. So I think the more we politically pressure Israel, the worse it's going to become for the United States. And we're going to start seeing these multiple crises starting to form on all fronts. And even here in Texas, you have the largest wildfire in the state's history.
Huge.
And it's more than just the land burning. That's prime like cattle areas where ranches are and where a lot of people's beef comes from. So you think about now the cost of beef is going to go up. The availability of beef is going to go up, go down where you can buy it at, because you're taking away one of those major assets that feeds Americans, and then multiply that across, every type of spectrum you can in the United States. But if we keep pressuring Israel, I think that we will start to see the United States get militarily involved in other things which leads me to believe that it's going to be something in Ukraine, and it's going to be something tied with NATO. So that's just, we pressured Israel back in 2006, I think it was, to give up Gaza to the Palestinians. And what happened? I mean, Hurricane Katrina, boom, hits us, and it just devastates. And it has impacted the United States ever since then. And I think we're looking at that same kind of scenario right now where Biden and the Obama bureaucrats that have been brought into the Biden administration, who are running everything, they're the ones that are driving us into this, because they don't care. They don't care that we collapse. They want us to collapse because they want us to be rolled into this new global system. And so they might be, studied up on Bible prophecy. They might have read Bill Koenig's book, Eye to Eye. They might know that the more they pressure Israel, the worse it becomes for America. And then eventually we're just going to fall apart. And that's the intent. So I don't know if they know that or believe Bill Koenig, but it just seems like that's the end state for them. So however they can get us there and to get us to fall apart, that's the better. Even if there's a civil war in the United States over the elections, the results one way or the other, and then they declare martial law, whatever the case is, the globalists win because they get a weaker United States.
Absolutely.
That's not united.
Exactly what they want. Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly what they want, is a weaker United States. And Bill Koenig, I mean, he's really put some puzzle pieces together, and it's really just remarkable to see those connections. When we make moves against Israel, when the United States makes moves against Israel, and boom, what happens? I mean, it is crazy. I mean, his list of all of this is so long, It's just crazy. It's just crazy. Well, and then something else is very interesting as well, and that is weather modification and the technologies that they have here in the United States, in Saudi Arabia, and in a few other nations as well in weaponizing the weather, utilizing the weather as a weapon. From cloud seeding, different things that they can do as well. And I mean, it's a fascinating thing to really get into. And this isn't if they might or they're trying to develop these things. Guys, they've already done this. We've had this technology for some time now, okay? And I think it's interesting because when you look in Revelation during the tribulation there, and one of the things that you see is just major weather forces. I mean, just crazy stuff going on. And is all of this playing into that, or will it all play into that? I mean, only time will tell. But I think it's another aspect of modern warfare that we see today, is the whole weather modification and all. And by the way, I mean, if someone's, we've only got a few minutes left, but if you got a question, put your question out there. If it's, directed at the subject matter that we're talking about, just put it in all caps, question. But what are your thoughts about weather modification as a weapon of war?
Well, I think that is one of those technologies that they've been able to really get a handle on in the last couple of decades, and they're beginning to weaponize it, as you said. And I think that some of the things where we're starting to see, this hasn't happened in 500 years. Why is this happening? These atmospheric rivers that are hitting California, from my understanding, it was part and parcel with these cloud seeding operations that they'd been trying to bring more water into California artificially.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting the result of this like massive floodings. And I don't know where California is today, but I know that they have a number of counties that have declared emergencies. But we're also in the middle between an El Nino year moving into a La Nina cycle, on top of having entering into a solar maximum. I think this year the summer will be pretty catastrophic in terms of, or at least the number of hurricanes should, if we're looking at historical trends, should be pretty high this year, and should be pretty impactful. So I think it's interesting that all this stuff is going on with Israel, that we're trying to force Israel into this terrible situation. And we're also entering in the natural cycle of things, a very precarious time, on top of the artificial things we're doing with messing with the weather, weaponizing immigration, which is part and parcel of that Cloward and Piven strategy to overwhelm the systems. But as they're overwhelming the systems in cities, all these sanctuary cities were saying, no mas, no mas, we can't take any more people. They just keep pouring in, right? Because the administration doesn't want to do anything, because the Hegelian dialectic, they want to create this crisis that they will turn around and exploit to their own ends. So I don't know, man. I think either way you look at it, I mean, we're looking at a really rough year. I mean, think about it this way too. If China does get dragged into this conflict and we end up fighting against Chinese soldiers in Ukraine, what do you think is going to happen to the global supply chain? Think about everything that's made in China. How much of our daily store-bought goods are made in China? How many parts and pieces of machinery and all the other things that are made in China? That's going to come to an end very abruptly.
Well, Pete,
and we are going to struggle.
Absolutely. Consider the pharmaceuticals. I can't say it. Pharmaceuticals, right? How much of our pharmaceuticals come from China? Look, Trump talked about this years ago. I believe that alone, just that alone, is a national security threat. Just that alone. And when you mix that with this attack that had happened now, what was it, a week or 2 weeks ago? I'm losing track of time now. Against 1/3, it's the processing of the between the pharmacies and the insurance companies, and 1/3 of those have been affected by that attack. I mean, this is big stuff. This is big stuff. And then we've got a couple of questions on here. Eric T, back on the app, is saying, can you speak about the bunkers being built by the elites? And you had said something really profound, I believe, the other day when you were on with Tom. in regards to that from Revelation. If you could speak about that for a moment, and then we've got an attack or a question after that from Jason Garza. Will Russia attack Poland? So let's get this one here first, though, about the bunkers being built by the elites, which, by the way, I find fascinating. They all know something's up, something's coming.
Yeah. So what I told Tom was that the ultra wealthy, and I'm talking billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison, Michael Dell, all these guys, have vastly incredible intelligence networks. Not only that, but they're also, because they're being used by our own national intelligence agencies, all 17 of them. They have this kind of incestuous hand washing relationship where they kind of take care of each other. So I'm sure they're being fed information at the very top. So they are preparing for something that they may not know exactly what it is, but they're saying, hey, this year you need to be looking out for these kinds of things, these kinds of threats. You've got a number of politicians, a number of these ultra elite billionaires who are selling off massive amounts of stock. They're buying building bunkers in places like Hawaii, right, Colorado. I don't know where they are with New Zealand, but I know they're purchasing land in New Zealand. I don't know if they're allowed to actually build bunkers in New Zealand, but they're preparing for something, and we're starting to see these guys move. And so what I mentioned to Tom was that, as a good rule of thumb for us is that we don't need to listen to what they say. We need to watch what they're doing. So you can go to trackcapitaltrades.com and you can look at the stock movements for politicians, and you can see a number of them have these huge sell-offs on particular things. You can just keep up on the news. It's all over the news. They're preparing for something. And we know that in Revelation 6, talking about the sixth seal, these rich men, these mighty men, these captains, and these very powerful people are hiding in these holes, in these mountains, in these caves, because the day of the wrath of the Lamb of God, the day of the wrath of the Lamb has come. They recognize the seriousness of this, and they're trying to get as deep down as they can. It's interesting that is stated in that way because they're preparing those bunkers now that eventually will be seen being inhabited and used and utilized in the sixth seal, part of the sixth seal judgment. So I don't know. It's for guys like me that don't have the means to go build my own bunker. I mean, my faith is completely and totally reliant upon God to see us through these challenging times, and it's going to be challenging for all of us. And so I just, we got our hope. Our hope isn't in the bunker. Our hope isn't in the next president. Our hope isn't in a political party to save us. It's not in the economy turning around. Our hope is in the person, Jesus Christ, who has promised to come back to take us to where he is before all these terrible things happen. So we can take Jesus at his word. We know we can trust him, that he is God incarnate, that he is able to speak the universe into existence. He's also knowledgeable about every sparrow, whether they live or fall on the ground, all the numbers of hairs on our head. He knows every star by name. He knows us. He's known us from before the foundation of the world, and he will see us through these times. He's specifically chosen us to live in this generation, to live in this final generation before humanity is wrapped up in this 6,000-year saga of human failure is put to bed. So I'm confident. I'm expectant. I'm hopeful that, and I'm trying to just be busy about the Lord's work. Also keeping an eye on the sky and looking up and trusting in God. And I think this is the time when we get to exercise that faith and that trust in him like no other.
Amen. Amen. All right, we've got like maybe 2 minutes left here. But I said that we were going to answer Jason Garza's question: will Russia attack Poland?
I think if there is an attack on Poland, I think it will be accidental. And by accidental, I mean it could be, how like in Israel, Hamas or whoever is going to launch a missile, and you have all these eyewitnesses that are watching this missile making this, like, it's going to hit this place, and at the last second, it's kind of moved off course for whatever reason, right. Which I think is divine purposes. But if there is a errant missile or stray missile that hits Poland and Poland chooses to exercise Article 5 or call in NATO for, hey, we just got attacked. And we know this happened a couple of years ago or about a year and a half ago. But that missile, I think, was believed to have come from Ukraine.
Right.
So it was kind of swept under the rug. But I think if there's an obvious enough attack by Russia onto Poland or to Lithuania or whoever, and NATO doesn't exercise Article 5 and stand up and retaliate, if they choose not to do that because they know that they're going to get their what's handed to them, I think at that point NATO will be dissolved and they will
Right.
basically convert that over into just a purely European defense force. And so all I know is at the end of this, Russia is still going to be standing. Iran's going to be standing. Turkey's going to be standing because they have to be present and participants into the Gog Magog conflict that happens. In my opinion, it happens after the rapture, but before the start of the tribulation. So I know people put it in different places, but they have to be those characters have to be there and able to be mustered into that battle configuration where they get wiped out by God.
I agree. I completely agree. All right. Well, hey, wow, this has been great. We've covered so much, and wow, there's still so much more we could talk about. Man, we're gonna have to have you back here sometime soon, Pete, and go over some more that's on the list. Because wow, I mean, things have really been heating up big time. But hey, just like you were saying in regards to the bunkers, look, our hope isn't in a bunker. I don't have a bunker. I mean, hey, look, our hope is in the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. And look, if we're not here, then we're there with the Lord. And so that's always going to be a better place to be anyway. So I'm not concerned about those things. So to speak. But as we talk about all of these things, though, what it does tell us is that we are getting closer, and we are to be looking and waiting and watching and occupying until the Lord comes, and evangelizing and walking by faith, and not just twiddling our thumbs like, what do I do next? Guys, there is a lot of labor to be done. What did the Lord say? There's a lot of harvesting that needs to be done, but the harvesters are few. Don't be, well, you know what? Be one of the few. The proud, the bold, part of God's army, And man, I'll tell you what, we're on the winning team. Amen. We are on the winning team. All right. Well, hey, thank you again so much for being on the program today, and we look forward to next time. How you can connect with Pete, all that information there will be in the description section of the video. And man, he writes some fantastic articles and all of that, so I encourage you to check that out and check out his videos and everything. And do you have any one last thing you'd like to close us out with? Give us some hope.
Kurt, it is always an honor to be on with you. I really enjoy our time together. I can't wait. I'm hoping some situation allows me to go out to Las Vegas and actually get to hang out with you, and we can do one of these in person. But
That'd be great.
just for the general audience, we know that this year is going to be rough. Keep looking up. Stay busy for the Lord. Whatever He's called you to do, work. Evangelize within your own circles of influence. Share the gospel with those people. If you don't have a good church, start a Bible study, start something with just a handful of people and get that going. Don't let the excuse of there is no churches in my area stop you from meeting with people in real life. And this is a blessing to be able to meet online, but it should not be the only thing that we hang on to, because we don't know how much longer we'll have access to the internet. We don't know how much longer they'll allow Christian content to be on YouTube and other places. So it is very, 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 very important for people to develop these circles within their own local communities where they can get together and encourage each other and lift each other up. So conferences are a great way for, especially like Australia, New Zealand, a great way for people to network once they get there and they realize, hey, I'm not alone. This guy lives in the next town. This lady lives over here. We can always get together. And that's one of the beautiful things about those. But please find local people that you can meet up with on a weekly, monthly basis, do these Bible studies, encourage each other, because things like YouTube, Rumble, and all these other platforms may not be here in the not too distant future. So,
All right. All right. Well, thank you again. And hey, the Lord bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Glad to have everyone that was watching today as well and some of those questions. Till next time.